One thing that is for certain is that human creativity will be more important than ever in a few years' time, when anyone can make their own Pixar film.
Hello and welcome along to another episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm Jo Redfern.
I'm Emily Horgan, and Andy, you have a guest for us.
Yes, we're delighted to be joined by Tom Box, co-founder and joint MD of Blue Zoo, and we're going to be talking about the not at all controversial subject of AI. Tom, welcome to the show.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for inviting me on.
Kind of expecting lightning to strike you as soon as you said those two words.
I can already see the kind of hordes climbing up the hills with their pitchforks. So yes, we wanted to. Well, firstly, could you give us a kind of brief introduction to kind of what you do at Blue Zoo in terms of your role, and then we can kind of dive into the subject of AI and Blue Zoo's kind of position in terms of navigating an ethical path.
So yeah, I'm one of the original co-founders of Blue Zoo, and when we first started, my role was doing a bit of the technology, setting the computers up, and also animating, because there was just a few of us. So it's kind of thing where we had to do everything. And so I've always been kind of trying to push Blue Zoo to make sure we're never being technically complacent, because that's dangerous for any company. And we've done that many times over the past few years. For example, we were one of the first studios in the world, I think, to make a whole series using gaming graphics cards render engines, and that was back in 2015, and now it's kind of commonplace now. So my role has always been to really try and balance the creative and technology to push it as far as possible, so we continue to make beautiful animation, but doing it in the most efficient way possible that allows our artists to really focus on their creativity, and also allowing us to really stretch the budgets, which doing the GPU stuff allowed us to do. And I think that was one of the things that led to our studio really upping its game in what we could deliver for preschool budgets, which kind of pushed things forward. So it's always trying to kind of balance the creative, the technology to make a work that everyone's really proud of at the end of the day.
Mm.
Absolutely. And I guess that also leads us neatly onto the specific subject of AI, because I think there's almost another layer to that creativity and technology dilemma, which is also finding a way to sort of navigate an ethical way through with AI that your whole team is going to be on board for. So talk us through how you've established your kind of policy on AI and what that means, really.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we really wanted to do it is because there was so much changing, a bit of a kind of a free-for-all, and which can be confusing, and it can be dangerous as well from, legal, ethical perspectives. And as a B Corp, we've got to be, really responsible and being able to kind of measure and monitor what we're doing. And I guess in some ways, people thought that as a B Corp, we shouldn't be using AI at all. Where my interpretation of a B Corp is how do we know where we are, and where can we improve? And it's not really trying to say you're the best possible company, but it's about saying you're trying to figure out where you can do as best as you can within the parameters that we operate in. And so I always see it's kind of trying to balance ethical sustainability with financial sustainability. Otherwise, we'll just be another animation studio that will be in the history books. So it's trying to balance that. So the policy really came from trying to figure that out and writing it on paper, so everyone literally was on the same page of knowing where things are at. And so we did that by polling everyone in our studio to get everyone's thoughts, if people are using it, where people are finding it's useful for or not useful for. And that is a very tricky thing to do, because it's such a binary subject in many ways, and trying to find a common ground in a wide variety of opinions is not an easy thing. But we ended up coming up with kind of 10 statements. So rather than kind of being a really dry kind of wall of text policy, we thought, we'll make 10 statements that are a little bit more human and a bit more digestible, that really kind of lay out our goals. And we did that We did it for a few iterations. It took quite a while to actually come to that. And it was really trying to work out where on that ethical spectrum we're going to draw the line, where everyone draws that line at a different place. And it's something that, we're never going to satisfy everyone is in that regard, but we just have to try and do what we think's right in the most kind of progressive way that's focusing on, at the end of the day, what our impact is and how we can use that technology to maximize what we're doing rather than seeing it in a more of a reductive way. So how can we see it as a way of increasing that opportunity, but is not at the expense of any artists, and it's not just a profit squeezing exercise.
Was it a conscious decision to do that internal piece of work first? Because what you're talking about really is you need a position because the operating context has changed. So Bluezoo needs a position, and you need that both internally as a business, but also a position within a wider industry. Was it conscious to go internal first because that they're your resource, they're your people?
Yeah, because we want to make sure that we're not doing it blindly, and we're understanding what everyone's concerns are. So there were some things that we didn't that only through asking everyone. For example, one of the things people said that they were concerned it may make their work less enjoyable because what one person thinks is donkey work, another person really enjoys that part of it. Yeah. So it's trying to really make sure that we weren't blinkered in our perspectives of what people's concerns were. And so we did it internally to figure those things out. And then we thought it's important to do it externally as well. As, again, being a B Corp is about transparency, where there's a lot of companies using AI, but keeping it on the lowdown. We really wanted to try and encourage other companies as well to be transparent about it, like a few other studios have as well. Because that's important to try and encourage other companies too, but also we can put it publicly so other clients can see what our stance is as well. Yeah. So
what's the response been from clients or the industry, with that?
The feedback I've had, people seem to think it's quite a sensible and mature approach where we're not taking a binary stance on it.
Yeah.
But we're trying to just lay out where we think it's acceptable to use and where we're drawing the line. Some things we're putting in place. For example, we put in place with all of our voiceover artists, we got our lawyers to insert that we will not use the artists' voices in training data without their explicit written permission. So we're trying to kind of go beyond what is the kind of like the bare expectations to actually help enforce some of those rules that other companies might not.
And I imagine that in some ways, what's sensible about that is you're kind of future-proofing your contractual relationships, because there's probably a likelihood that those kind of things are going to be ongoing conversations. And I'm sure you're going to get more and more voiceover artists that will just de facto have lines like that in their own contracts. So you're almost future-proofing those kind of relationships, I think.
Yeah. And also, I think it's about sometimes it's not just about what we want, but it's about the commercial pressures from clients.
Absolutely.
Saying, oh, we want you to do this. And we can say, well, no, actually, our contracts don't allow that. So it kind of ring fences us from the commercial external pressures as well.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, that those kind of contractual obligations are also quite good ways to protect the company as well as the individual artists and be working on. Has your opinion on AI shifted or evolved through the process of coming up with this policy?
Yeah, I think through that kind of consultation process, it did, because when we did the first draft, we sent it out, and the first draft was a lot more kind of binary in that way, where it drew some much thicker lines, because we didn't want to write something that was so fluffy it was useless. And in that one, we said we won't use any AI in production. We said we'll only just use it for kind of ideation, but any production work will still always go via a brain before it kind of ends up as a pixel. But then the feedback we had on that was some of our artists were using tools like Adobe Firefly and kind of Photoshop generative fill. And they said, well, do I seriously have to spend 6 hours doing this tedious task when I can actually just press one button to do it? Why?
Mm.
Okay, well, in that sense, if the tool is using legitimate training data, then and that has been legally okayed, then we'll let the artist choose whether they want to speed up their workflows in that sense. And we found that that was the fairest way we could think of, not feeling like we're forcing artists to use it, but they can make educated choice on whether they feel like it will help their workflow in them doing their job. So that was one of the things that I found quite interesting, that there was a demand from artists. There are other artists that, you know, thought we were awful for even mentioning the two words and considering it. But I think part of that is us trying to educate as well as part of it, because I think part of the policy was trying to increase the AI literacy as well. And there's a lot of information flying around out there. And I thought it's important, especially because of, from, like I said earlier, from that kind of technical perspective, we only exist because of technology.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is separate the arguments of AI is bad because of the ethical training data and say, okay, well, let's ring fence that bit as one argument. And then the other part of the argument is the job displacement. So and that's tricky to look at, because a lot of our jobs that we're doing now, for example, if you're using Maya, there's been job displacement from a in-betweening artist. So that role wouldn't exist if at that time we said, no, we're not using Maya because there's job displacement happening there.
Mm.
And that's obviously, you could extrapolate that in all sorts of negative ways. But that's the kind of things we're having to deal with, is what point on that spectrum do you draw a line on the technical progression way, if you can park the whole data ethics side of it as one thing that needs resolving. So it is multidimensional, which has been a tricky part of it.
Yeah, and I guess for you as well, there's an element where, because ultimately, if you read some people's predictions for AI, is that you could have one person in their room creating everything, particularly with agentic AI and ultimately that is also, I'd imagine, not just a threat for individual artists and animators and operators, but also animation companies.
For sure. Yeah. In 5 years' time, our biggest threat's not going to be a big animation studio. It's going to be a young artist in their bedroom being able to generate a Pixar style film on their own, just as now we're seeing amazing kind of teenage Blender artists who are making whole films on their own that would have been impossible kind of 10 years ago. And that's been a progression, because as a studio, for example, we used to, like 10, 15 years ago, we used to do a lot of broadcast work, like we used to do when we did it for you, Andy, at Nickelodeon. And a lot of that work went away because suddenly just one artist, one freelance with Cinema 4D could do what a whole team of animators used to have to do. So we moved our business evolved it into more, and so it's that happening again. So it's not a new problem for us. It's just a continual problem of creative technology that makes these things easier. And obviously it gets hugely complicated by the data ethics side of it. But in that sense, we've got to really work out what that means for us, and not to stick our head in the sand and go, oh yeah, don't worry, that's going to happen. AI is going to have disappeared by next year. Because I think that's similar to someone thinking in the 20s, oh, this electricity fad, it'll be gone by now.
Also, that pace of change is increasing. So by nature, you need to start these conversations and actually be willing to evolve them as well, because that operating context will change again in 12 months, because there'll be different ways of deploying it. There might be new bits of tech that dovetail in with AI and that we can't even possibly predict that will emerge. So at least having the conversation in the open allows you to allow for that.
Yeah, and what we try to do is again share that information internally. So we've been trying out lots of different tools. Like we tried various different, for example, voice synthesis tools, so we can understand where we're at. Not to say we're going to use them, but so we know what's out there, so we can make an informed decision of what the right and wrong thing is. And some people internally have gone, well, why are you trying that tool out? And it's like, well, because we need to be informed, otherwise we're just winging it, and that's not good for anyone. So we've done all sorts of experiments with all sorts of tools that we'd never consider using, but we think it's important to know where the technology is, whether it's legitimately used or not.
And what do you think the opportunities are? Because that's the whole point of, like, one of the most exciting things about AI is that, like, there is opportunity, particularly say in development, to be able to, like, do things quick, scrap things quick, and it's not like at the investment level is much more compelling.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it that we're focusing on, is like seeing how we can use it for that kind of prototyping, not saying anything end up in the final thing, but then making sure you're using it in the right way. So you're not saying, okay, design me a toy character, or you're using human designs to then help it kind of get to that end visualization quicker to see if it works or not. Which is just about trying to kind of expedite that that thought exploration, so you can get to places that you might not have done before. But there is a danger if that kind of creeps into the actual production work. So a lot of what we're trying to do is draw some of those lines in the sand to make sure that that it's being used in those right areas, and also being transparent about it. So if you do make a mood board using AI art, it is saying these things are kind of AI art, and not trying to do it under the radar.
I guess that's also a way to because another question I had was with the kind of ubiquity of AI and everyone kind of making use of the same tools, there's a danger and a risk that a lot of the output looks very similar.
Totally.
And the question was, how does Blue Zoo incorporate AI into the workflow but still look distinctive and have a brand style, really?
Yeah, well, I think I was thinking about this the other day, and I think probably the next quotes will be that people use is, if your work looks like AI, you're not using AI correctly. And I can imagine that will be probably one will be trumpeted around soon. But I think in terms of sorry, what was the question again?
How do you kind of ensure that Blue Zoo's work looks distinctive?
Yeah,
if you're incorporating AI and everyone else has got the same tools, and particularly with generative AI, it's not just having the same tools. Often it's generating a similar look and image.
Yeah, I think that does come down to making sure you're using it in a way that is augmenting your process, and you're starting with real creativity. Because I think in some ways, I think one thing that is for certain is that human creativity will be more important than ever in a few years' time, when anyone can make their own Pixar film, and by nature it will all just verge to the norm, because everyone will be using similar tools with a similar data. So that means human creativity will be more important than ever to get to the top. And another skill I think will be incredibly important is that digital marketing, because in that tsunami of AI generated stuff, it will be about how well you can get your idea out there and grow your fan base. And that also needs human creativity. You won't just asking an agent, can you make a campaign for this, will just be the same as the million other people typing in, can you make me a campaign for this, which means it won't work anymore. It's a bit like YouTube thumbnails, where as soon as everyone starts doing it, it just turns all the same. So you have to then do something more creative. So I think in that sense, we're doubling down on creator-led content.
Particularly because AI kind of operates on a predictive model. That basically the way it does it is by predicting what's the next likeliest word to follow the previous word, and it does that visually as well. So if you just lean into that totally, you're going to get literally quite predictable outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, AI is exceptionally average by definition.
Yeah. And so in terms of that creativity, because I agree, I think it will throw into relief those that have those uniquely human ideas, those things that come from left field and whammy between the eyes are going to be what rises. When going through this process, where do you see currently it's adding value and perhaps freeing up your internal team to find that creative spark? Where are you using it?
I think it's just being used in a lot of small areas at the moment. So it's not, I think no one's delegating big tasks to it. It's just that kind of small incremental gains. So it could be from, like all companies, where you're just using it to help polish text. For example, the co-founder Ollie he's quite dyslexic, so he relies on it every single day. And then in the ideation phase as well, but also trying to use it in more boring ways of helping people kind of discover and share information internally. So it's I mean, I do use it quite a lot, to the point where you have to be very careful that you're not delegating too much of your thoughts to it, so you end up forgetting how to think, and you're just going, I'll just ask ChatGPT or Gemini instead. So I think there's a lot of it is your personal responsibility, I think, and not many people talk about the ethical use of AI. They talk about the ethics of the tool itself. And I think there's a lot of personal responsibility, which comes down to how we use these tools, not just what the tools are capable of or how they've been designed.
The healthy use of them, which is probably, I guess, it's something that never really came up on social, and I think is, paying the price on it now. But I do think, for blank page syndrome, it's unreal. Do you know what I mean? Because there's nothing worse than staring at a blank page and like just getting started on ideation.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can just get started, then the flow can really happen.
Yeah, but and likewise, it's not everyone has that problem. So it's like, brilliant.
Who doesn't have that problem? What are they on?
But it's like similar. I had I've got a bot that kind of responds to emails that come into my inbox, and it's very rare that, in fact, never you'd just say yep, send. But it's often shows me the wrong way of writing an email. I don't know if you see it, like when you see something that's wrong, it's a lot easier to pick up and make it right than looking at something completely blank. So the way my brain works, again, not the same everyone's works, for me, it makes it a lot easier to quickly fix that email to what I want to send it, rather than that blank page syndrome, which I always get stuck with. So it's looking at it in those small ways of what works personally for me. And again, I wouldn't say, hey, everyone should use this tool, because a lot of people might be able to write emails brilliantly off the hoof, and good for them. But for me, I do find it a lot easier just showing the wrong email, and then I can quickly do that.
And in a sense, that's as someone who runs an animation studio, that helps the studio itself, because that means that you in aggregate are freed up to then support your staff, or to
wear even more hats.
Yeah, wear even more hats. Yes. I'm interested. I mean, you've always been someone that I associate with kind of tinkering with tech, and you're fascinated at trying this stuff out, which I think is amazing. Knowing what kids are like, because they're picking up these tools already. They are using them in their bedrooms, as we've already alluded to. So, and again, you're involved with kind of bringing young people into the animation business. What do you think they could do to prepare themselves for a career in an industry that is changing so rapidly, and where AI is concerned? Is it just a question of diving in and learning all of these tools?
It's a really hard thing, isn't it? Because it's obviously you could use it in bad ways, and a child could go off and do the wrong things and that. So I think, like a lot of technology, it's about having that eye on top of what they're doing. But I had this discussion with my wife where I said that I thought my daughter should have ChatGPT on her phone, and my wife was like, "Oh, I don't think that would be appropriate." And I was like, "Well, being how much of a censored walled garden ChatGPT is, I said I'd much rather her have ChatGPT than Google, because there's no a lot of stuff out there that's on Google, not on ChatGPT." And I was actually quite surprised how she ended up using it, because it was just about trying to encourage her to experiment. Initially, she asked, "Can I just ask it to do my homework?" I was like, "No, that's not an appropriate use." But then I said, what you can do is you can feed your homework into it and ask it for feedback. Yeah. And then she did that, and she got a really good score, and I was proud of her. And likewise, another thing, I saw her type a really she sent a message to her friend that was quite empathetic in a mature way. And I was like, "Oh, that's really nice. That's a nice way of phrasing it." She goes, "Yeah, I talked to ChatGPT to work out how to message this friend who was being a little bit tricky." So I think there are use cases that are good, but also I think you can't be too blasé about it, but it's, again, just how you can look at it in that progressive way and try and hold people's hands while using it.
I mean, I feel like it definitely has a utility in terms of almost like an educational learning tool, without doubt. I think the thing to manage, and that goes back to your kind of personal responsibility for how AI is used, is for it not to become a crutch.
Yeah.
The basically, you don't want it to rob people of agency if they don't have it. So actually, if those kind of learning points can then help develop that so that they have that capacity themselves, then I think that's great.
Yeah. Where there's a big danger of that with like vibe coding, for example. If in 10 years' time you have no one that can program computers because all they've done is type into whatever tool, make me an app, then suddenly there's a big problem there.
But isn't that true of, I mean, it doesn't need to be coding. It could be somebody can't build a 3D model, or they can't draw the character design themselves, or there's definitely multiple points at which I feel like people just need to be quite conscious of the way AI is being used, so it becomes something that can amplify people's talents, but not effectively stop them developing those talents themselves.
Yeah, totally. And it's I guess trying to figure out how to do that is the tricky bit.
It's the same as kind of digital literacy and social media literacy, isn't it? You know, it's not just understanding how kids use it, but it's also as parents as well, figuring out how we support them to learn to use it responsibly. It's got parallels there too.
Because one of the things I'm struck by is that I feel like everyone instinctively has a line on AI where they sort of draw the line there, and they're often the lines where they personally feel like they have that kind of talent or skill themselves. So
that's
for you, Tom, I could imagine you understand coding, so you understand what is lost by someone vibe coding, and
but I think,
and likewise, kind of writer friends of mine will definitely have strong opinions about AI being used for writing, because that's something that they understand as intimately as you might understand coding.
I think the tricky thing there is when our industry goes from being a passion into suddenly being paid for, that becomes quite tricky, because with the coding example, it's massively sped up the coding I do at work, because I can just ask it to kind of write a bunch of tests, write some code, check itself, and then see it, which has sped up the amount I can do in work and coding immensely, which has made it less fun. But then in the evenings, I'm tinkering, doing kind of procedural art using no AI at all. And I think that's the tricky thing in our industry, where it is a passion industry, and that makes it even more blurry when you're using those tools to speed up something that you actually do enjoy. And I think that, again, just makes it more complicated.
I saw a cartoon about AI where you had two characters in an office, and one said, I've used AI to write this 2-page email that I haven't read, and the other that I haven't written, and then the other person said, I've used AI to read this 2-page email that I haven't read. And you kind of, basically there's been no human agency involved at all. So that's the thing to manage against, I think. But there are obviously tons of opportunities there as well.
Yeah, but I think part of it is trying to, another thing in the manifesto was saying you can't blame AI. So it's making sure people realize they are accountable. And at the end of the day, it's a bit like, hiring someone. You can't hire someone and then blame them for messing up when you've delegated the work to them. So I think it's reminding people of that as well, so that everyone is on the hook. Even if they think, I'll just get some AI tool to do it, then I can shirk any responsibility. We've had to remind people that's not the case, and something to be wary about.
And so on the whole, given that you've gone through this process where you've actually really been thinking about it, scrutinizing, testing your own approach to it, maybe even revising how you feel about it, what's your outlook for AI in the creative industries at the moment? Would you say it's on the more positive side?
I think anything I say will probably be wrong in about 6 months. I think I'm always an optimist, and I always like to see what opportunity these tools can bring. At the same time, I can totally understand why there is so much frustration and anger when it's been trained on two people's artwork without their permission. So, but I think one thing is that it improves by the day. And that's the trickiest thing that we have to wrestle with, because who knows where that will be in 6 months, let alone 5 years. And that's why we're trying to figure out where, as a studio, our place will be in 5 years. And I thrive on change and challenge, but not everyone does. So again, trying to find a nice balance there is a tricky one. But like I said, the main thing for us is whatever it happens, that human creativity will always be front and center, because it does just make it absolutely critical by nature of what the tools are doing. So it's trying to just find that very fine path so we can make sure that we'll still be here in 5 years, and we won't just have been just another studio that's kind of fallen away. But yeah, it's trying to find that is a tricky thing to do.
Absolutely.
I agree. I feel like it'll be an ongoing conversation. And it has to be, because the way, as you said, within 6 months, 12 months, there'll be a whole different set of circumstances and operating context that will require everybody to revise their approach again. So thank you for explaining Blue Zoo's approach in May 2025. I'm sure we'll revisit it at some point.
I've listened back and cringed in a year's time.
No, I think you mapped out kind of very sensible response for that. And I think the fact that you're aware of how changeable the situation is, that feels like the wisest way to kind of navigate what's coming.
I think it's just trying to be open-minded in the most kind of fairest sense of the word, and just trying to see what's out there, and trying to find a way that's kind of respectful to everyone in terms of those that it is kind of negatively affecting, and seeing how we can balance that.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, as an employer, that's your responsibility as well, isn't it, to support your employees through those changes? So kudos for kind of being the first to really nail your colours to the mast in terms of dealing with it.
Cheers.
Yeah, that's great. Shall I do a quick sign off?
Over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much for that, Tom. I hope you guys have enjoyed that. And we'd be very interested to hear any of your thoughts on AI and its use and application. So, yeah, ping us a message if you've got strong opinions on that. And remember to like and subscribe on all the various platforms, and we will see you next week.